Here in the United States, we're all familiar with the muscle car era of the 60s and early 70s, but did you know there was also a muscle bike era? Absolutely brutal two-wheeled machines that ruled the streets and dominated the drag strip. Big blocks and Hemis didn't stand a chance when poised next to one of these burly muscle bikes. When it came to straight line speed, these two-wheeled beasts simply devoured the competition. Though the muscle bike era went on for some 15 years, I'm mostly going to focus on the end of the 70s into the early 80s because that period right in there, that's when motorcycles were just getting absolutely bonkers. But that being said, since I am going to be focusing on the later portion, let's actually take a step back and see about when it all started. The muscle bike era started arguably in 1969 with the release of Honda's CB750, the most sophisticated production bike ever. The big four Japanese motorcycle manufacturers started battling it out for bigger, more powerful engines, more speed, more drama, more thrills. Kawasaki and Honda were at each other's throats, trying to one-up each other whenever one of them introduced the next, better bike. It was a gnarly battle of the bikes that lasted over a decade and a half. For the consumers at the time, they got some truly badass bikes. Also keep in mind that there are a ton of fascinating bikes from this entire period, and it was quite a large period of time too. I will do my best to cover all the cool bikes. Don't be offended if I don't mention your bike, but there are so many cool bikes from this entire period that I can't cover unless I wanted to make a video that was a year long, and I won't do that. Back in 1969, Kawasaki was just about to release their heavy hitter, but Honda beat them to the punch with their CB750. Undeterred, Kawasaki went back to the drawing board to create something truly stunning, and they did. Kawasaki enters the arena with their new Z1900. It's here to decimate the competition, and it does. It's the most powerful Japanese four-cylinder, four-stroke motorcycle ever marketed. People love its looks and power. This was the bike to have. A few years later, and Honda hits back with the Goldwing? Yes, the Honda Goldwing GL1000. Not what you picture as a muscle bike because, especially nowadays, does not at all seem like an intimidating two-wheeled beast. Granted, it's not, but it does set the stage for what's to come. And what's to come is bigger engines, more power, faster speeds, and more weight. Honda wasn't content any longer with their CB750 and strongly desired to impress Americans with their motorcycle technologies, not just with speed, but with an exceptional ability to go long distances comfortably and reliably. The GL1000 was another masterpiece that showed the world that Honda knows how to make good bikes. It was quickly adopted by the public as the touring bike king, but don't be fooled into thinking it's just a slow and heavy boat on two wheels. No, this machine is thrilling for riders that want it. Despite its appearance, the GL1000 was one of the quickest bikes you could buy, posting quarter-mile times in the 12-second range. The power plant was a single overhead cam flat 4 that was shaft-driven. It was also the first Japanese motorcycle to use a liquid-cooled flat 4 design, a design that continues to be refined and used in Goldwings to this day. However, I'll just quickly note that the modern Goldwings utilize a flat 6 engine that has ballooned to a massive 1800 cc's, but the basis remains the same. You wouldn't assume by looking at it, but this Honda also has pretty good handling. The flat 4 was tucked down low in the chassis, giving it a tight and secure feel. See the fuel tank? That's actually a dummy tank. The real fuel tank was underneath the seat, another way Honda kept the center of gravity low. The Goldwing probably won't ever be looked at as a superbike or muscle bike, but I would argue that it was the forerunner for things to come. This was Kawasaki's answer to Honda, and their chance to be in the limelight again. Please welcome the 1977 Kawasaki KZ1000, a faster, sophisticated, and more refined machine than Kawas of the past. Even back then, Kawasaki was obsessed with making absurdly fast motorcycles. The KZ1000 was one of the fastest bikes of this era, not just in Japan, but for the entire world. Imagine buying one of these in the late 70s. You were essentially buying a rocket on two wheels. It could propel you from 60 miles an hour in the high 3 seconds up to a top speed past 130 miles an hour. In the late 70s, what car would be able to keep pace with that? Before you go on thinking that this bike was only for speed addicts and daredevils, you should also know that it's actually civilized, capable of comfortable long rides and good fuel economy. Its operation is very smooth and quiet, and offered decent handling too. The power plant in this suave monster is an air-cooled 1015cc inline 4-cylinder producing around 90 horsepower and a claimed top speed of 132 miles an hour. The KZ1000 got 3 disc brakes, 2 up front and 1 in the rear, which was pretty special for the time. When configuring the specifications of your new KZ1000, you could choose to have it built with either chain drive or shaft drive. In 1980, the Z1000H was the first mass-produced fuel-injected motorcycle in the world, as well as being Kawasaki's first fuel-injected motorcycle. For those of you that were paying attention, you may have just noticed that I said Z1000 instead of KZ1000. Well, they're the same bike, just a slightly different name for the US market. The KZ is the American market Z. Kawasaki raised the bar yet again, which means everyone else had to follow suit. Yamaha was late to the party, but when they arrived, they came in swinging. As an owner of this bike, I can testify that this brute is a real kick in the rear. This two-wheeled monster is, of course, the Yamaha XS11. Yamaha was known for making fun motorcycles, and while they were busy doing exactly that, it didn't look like they were going to hop into the horsepower wars like the rest. In 1977, they released the XS750, a 3-cylinder, 4-stroke, shaft-drive bike that was a wonderful machine, but no match for the bigger bikes. Little did anyone know, Yamaha was about to drop the biggest and baddest bike of all time, the fearsome XS11. The Yamaha wasn't quite as refined as some of the others, but what it lacked in sophistication, it made up with raw, unparalleled power. At the time of its release, this was the fastest production bike in the world, with a top speed of over 136 miles an hour, and able to run the quarter in the 11s. It's called the XS11 because the engine displaces 1100 cc's, but some people say it has that name because it runs 11s in the quarter mile. At its debut in 1978, the XS11 was the largest capacity Japanese motorcycle in production. It was also a behemoth, weighing in at 630 pounds wet. This was Yamaha's first attempt at a 4-cylinder, 4-stroke engine, and they nailed it. Cycle magazine is quoted saying, "The XS is a Rolls-Royce with a blown Chrysler Hemi motor." A nice analogy to make it clear that it's a straight-line monster, and that's exactly what it is. Corners are not this bike's friend. Though the XS11 struggled with cornering, it managed to be a winner on the racetrack. Both Honda and Suzuki produced more nimble and quicker bikes shortly after this Yamaha was introduced. Yet the Yam managed to win races. Its success was helped by a larger capacity fuel tank than the others, and being dead reliable. Yamaha didn't produce the most exquisite bike of the time, but they did produce the very definition of a muscle bike. Even today, the XS is known as being the muscle bike. Don't start thinking I forgot about Suzy. Suzuki was the last of the big 4 motorcycle manufacturers to join in on the exclusive 1000cc plus craze. Being late to the game isn't necessarily a bad thing. This gave Suzuki time to design and build a superb machine. The GS1000 was based around the desirable GS750. It was an excellent platform, so why not just improve and modify that? That's exactly what they did. Though many modifications to the GS750 were made, the main one, and the one we care about right now, is that Suzuki lengthened the stroke of the 750 engine to 997cc. Not only was the bottom end of the 750 engine sturdy enough to cope with the extra displacement and power, but the new 1000 engine was actually lighter than the previous 750 engine. Suzuki's GS1000 is arguably one of the best motorcycles of this era. However, interestingly enough, none of them were sold in their home country of Japan. Japan had power and displacement limits that denied these machines from being sold there. Anyway, the GS1000 was definitely the correct way to end the decade. It's said to have been the fastest bike at the time. It was fairly lightweight and handled well too. Some people say it's the most beautiful bike of its time, and without a doubt, it's definitely attractive. And finally, this bike was a tremendous success for Suzuki. Though some folks have said that Suzuki copied Kawasaki's KZ1000, it's undeniable that Suzuki made a superior machine. It's attractive, blindingly fast, reliable, and well-mannered. To this day, the GS1000 has a strong following of devout enthusiasts. Some bikes have faded over time. This old Suzy is not one of those. If you're already familiar with this era of motorcycles, then you knew that this next one was going to be on the list. That is the Honda CBX. It was a wild bike back then, and it is still a wild bike today. The Honda CBX was introduced in 1978 as a 79 model, and was their first production 6-cylinder road bike. Although it was the first time for Honda to drop a 6-cylinder in a production motorcycle, it was not their first time tinkering with the 6-banger. They've had experience in that realm since the mid-60s in some of their race bikes. The engine in the CBX was blessed with GP racing technology. Now you, the humble rider, could own Honda racing motorcycle. Well, sort of. The CBX was the flagship of Honda motorcycles. Incredibly fast, silk smooth, pinnacle of innovation and reliable. All the things you'd expect from a Honda. It's been said that this motorcycle idles so smoothly, you could balance a quarter on end and it wouldn't fall over. Though loved by the press, daredevils, and kids that had posters of the CBX on their walls, it was not a sales success for Honda. The bike was a bit too daunting for most average riders. The engine appears to stick out of the side so far. It looks interesting, but cumbersome and unwieldy. In appearance, I'd admit it looks wide, however it should be noted that the engine of the CBX is only 2 inches wider than the CB750. Even so, people were still pretty intimidated by this machine. The CBX goes down in history similarly to the Lamborghini Countach as a piece of technological art. Exciting, exotic, attention-grabbing, and enjoyable to look at, but not the most user-friendly or practical. I also have to mention the wonderful sounds emitted from the 6-cylinder are second to none. Stock sounds amazing. An aftermarket exhaust sounds like an F1 car. If you were wondering where Kawasaki has been, don't worry, they're about to make the next big splash. It's big, brash, powerful, and heavy. This behemoth is the Kawasaki KZ1300. In typical Kawasaki fashion, they had to make something more radical than everybody else. A 120 horsepower, 700 pound block, capable of reaching 140 miles an hour and running the quarter in the 11s.
Wow.
This was the sledgehammer of motorcycles, a true muscle bike, Shaped like a brick and weighing as much as a house, this machine, through some sort of Japanese sorcery, launched its riders unbelievably quick and pulls tremendously hard. Plus, it's comfortable. Decked out with a windshield and saddlebags, this was choice for long hauls. A theme that most of these muscle bikes carried was, all of the power, none of the handling. A parts manager for Kawasaki is quoted saying, "It handled quite well, compared to a pig on stilts." 1979 is when we got the mighty and massive KZ1300, which is a bit unfortunate because it was late to the game. By the very end of the 70s, the behemoth muscle bike era was nearing the light at the end of the tunnel. As we'll get into shortly, the 80s began a new era for motorcycles. Development for the Kawi 1300 actually began in 1973, but took on a lot of changes over the years until it was finally released in 79. If this monster had been released a few years earlier, it absolutely would have been king of the hill. Though it existed much longer than Honda's CBX, 10 years compared to the CBX with only 5 years production, like the CBX, the KZ1300 didn't have huge success. It's undoubtedly an interesting and impressive machine, but for most riders it was just too much. This motorcycle has unfortunately faded into history and only has a small following today.
Good job!
Usually, the trends and styles of one decade blend into the next one for at least the first few years, but not this time. It's the 80s, an extraordinary time for Japan, full of technological advancement and prosperity. Japanese motorcycle makers were going full bore with pumping out the world's best motorcycles, backed with new, exciting electronic technology with sleek and sharp edges. It was a new decade, and Japanese bikes fully embraced this thrilling new age. Enter the 1980 Suzuki Katana GSX1100S, one of the most iconic bikes of the 20th century and arguably the first Japanese motorcycle to mark the end of the big, blocky, and bloated design. It marked the beginning of the end of the muscle bike era. Suzuki was hatching a plan to design a bike so radical that it would leave the entire motorcycle world speechless. They hired a German design team, a team of 3 guys, to design the prestigious Katana. Not only that, but the Katana was the first Japanese motorcycle not designed in-house. When the working prototype was displayed at the 1979 Cologne Motorcycle Show, the press believed it to be such an off-the-rails design that it would never be more than a concept. The typical heavy flat and square designs had prevailed for decades of motorcycling history. The press couldn't fathom such a radical design, yet, a few months later, the GSX 1100S Katana rolled out of the factory looking nearly identical to the prototype. Suzuki was again in the limelight. The Katana didn't steal the show just because of its dastardly good looks. It also handled sharp and precise, a far cry from the bikes of the 70s. It's said to have been the fastest production motorcycle, capable of going over 140 miles an hour and running the quarter mile in 11-second range. Just like the last 2 bikes I've talked about, this Suzy wasn't a sales hit. Definitely iconic, but didn't break any sales records. Its spaceship-like appearance burdens the blame. Even though the 1100 Katana didn't sell particularly well, it did establish a lasting legacy, a cult following so strong that Katanas sold for 2 decades. Suzuki decided to continue that legacy with their modern retro in 2020, with the GSX S1000 Katana. The original Katana took the motorcycle world by storm, and still today it's recognized everywhere. While the Katana's radically different styling was a sign of things to come, motorcycle manufacturers didn't immediately jump on that bandwagon. Not to be outdone and to keep with tradition, Honda released its sensational project, the first power cruiser, and it was very much in line with traditional muscle bikes, burly, hefty, and blisteringly fast.
Magna from Honda. Own one and you own the road.
Get yourself the new 1983 Honda V65 Magna, touted to be the world's quickest production motorcycle, capable of flying through the quarter in the low 11s for the average rider. For the seasoned professional, this was a 10-second bike. In 1983, Pee Wee Gleason took a stock of V65 Magna and blasted through the quarter mile in an unbelievable 10.84 seconds. Its direct competition for the quickest bike was the Kawasaki GS1100, but that, at best, could only muster a 10.91 second time. Extremely impressive, but the V65 Magna was quicker. A menacing-looking, ultra-powerful supercruiser able to smoke anything else on the road, while also being comfortable and capable for long hauls. Exactly what the bad boys of America ordered. Unless you ordered a Harley. Harley-Davidson was going bankrupt in the early 80s due to self-inflicted problems, such as a lackluster build quality and stagnated engineering. The Japanese manufacturers proved that they could build a vastly superior two-wheeled machine. This same year, 1983, then-President Ronald Reagan imposed massive tariffs on large Japanese motorcycles in order to bolster American-made Harleys. The move saved Harley-Davidson, but angered Japan. By 1987, Harley had done the proper work to be profitable again. They asked the Reagan administration to withdraw the tariffs as they were no longer needed. Among these imposed challenges, the V65 Magna was still a success and worthy achievement from Honda. The Big Four were clearly upset about the tariffs, but thankfully they didn't stop producing amazing motorcycles. Even though the 80s was a time of technological and design improvements being made at breakneck speed, the motorcycle builders knew that muscle bikes and superbikes were a hot commodity, as long as that's what the market wanted. But there is arguably one bike that emerged so popular and so successful and modern, it pushed everyone else to follow suit. The designs and tech from the muscle bike era was being phased out, while the new era was being ushered in. The year is 1984, and Kawasaki did it again, unveiling a machine so spectacular that it ended one era and started the next one, the era of the modern-day sport bike. This was Kawasaki's first bike to bear the Ninja nameplate. This is the Kawasaki GS1000R, an icon, and it was destined to be from the very beginning. This motorcycle was completely in its own league, leaving all others in the dust, and not just the Japanese Big Four, but all other motorcycle manufacturers. The GS1000R was the world's first 16-valve liquid-cooled inline-4, a highly advanced engine producing 115 horsepower in a 908cc space. The Ninja 900 was also a record breaker in the speed department, being the first production motorcycle to reach and surpass 150 miles an hour. Its top speed was actually somewhere around 155. In typical Kawasaki fashion, the records aren't done being broken yet. Our friend J. Pee Wee Gleason set a record of 10.55 in the quarter mile with this Ninja. It was the quickest and the fastest. It had modern tech and a highly advanced engine. Aerodynamics were finally taken into consideration with this design and implemented in a fashion that was functional but also looked cool and looked like the future, because it was. At last, what sets the Ninja 900 apart from bikes of the past was that it also handled superbly. It was smooth, balanced, ergonomic, and simply rideable. Unlike the others, this bike wasn't scared of the corners. Kawasaki raised the bar so high with this bike that it forced the creation of a new motorcycle segment. The GS1000R owes it all to the muscle bikes that came before it. Nearly 2 decades of development and warring against the others for the fastest, most powerful bikes. It was inevitable that one day a bike would break from the mold and end the traditional muscle bike. The Kawasaki GS1000R was the motorcycle to do just that. While muscle bikes and power cruisers didn't completely vanish, their interest and enthusiasm from the public was diminishing. Just like every era has a beginning and an ending, the golden age of muscle bikes was coming to a close. The future for motorcycles was still bright, and knowledge learned from the past was invaluable in bringing the era of the modern sport bike. And that has been the history of the muscle bike era. I sincerely hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you did, be sure to check out all the other videos that I have on my channel. Thank you very much for watching.